First of all, thank you very much for having us. Thank you for inviting us, and thanks to all of you for being with us, because we really want to tap your brains, as you are known to be very smart people. We really want to make use of this to be here. And we want to exchange about how our understanding and thus the narratives and your understanding as well of impact influences our ability to work system transformative. And for this, we would like to go to first of all share the initial findings of the study Kaplan was referring to, and more importantly, to get an exchange with you, to get your thoughts on it, to really also get some first-hand reactions on what you're seeing, what we were been doing. And this is Tereza, Arno, and me, and we are coming from, today it's cursed, from Welthungerhilfe. Just to give a rough framing, it's one of Germany's largest private aid agencies with around 290 million euros in funding in 22. We fight against hunger, which is independent of any faith and independent from any political orientation. We work together with the national partner organizations wherever possible. And this is in 37 countries with around 266 national partner organizations. And we want to pursue a rather holistic and quality and impact-oriented concept to collaboration, to international collaboration, which stretches from disaster relief to development projects. So dual-mandate organization, and this boils down to around 603 project sites worldwide, or in those 37 countries. And with this, we follow the principle of supporting people in really realizing their rights and improving their living conditions. In 22, it was roughly 19 million. And what it will be in 23 is what we know in a couple of days. And this all is, we're doing this to act towards our vision, to really create a world free from hunger and poverty, where people can excel their right to self-determined life in dignity and justice. And why now try to close the loop a little bit, why we are here today is because not only in those uncertain times, but rather in all times, we try to do this as good as possible with the given resources, meaning we want to maximize our impact to this. And as we say, we need to disrupt the impact narratives. We first wanted to get a benchmark, as Kaplan said, of what impact narratives could be, or impact definitions could be. And this is also what we'd like to hear from you at the very first. So now another tricky part begins. We'd like to run a little Mentimeter with you. So please feel free to just go to that site or scan that barcode, and also online you should be able to scan that code and submit your response. You have 200 characters, which is plenty for an impact definition, I hope. And let's see if it works in our embedded Mentimeter. So far, I see exactly 0 responses. Okay. It seems to work, right? Right. So, and please feel free to also elaborate as much as you like within those 200 words. How would you define impact? What is your understanding of an impact definition? The effect caused, I see already. Measurable change in condition rather than an outcome change. Change for good is very, very nice. Sustainable improvement, rate of effect. So we see a lot. Project meets the targeted outcome, different levels and scales. I somehow get rid of this. Attitude and conditions, weight of effect, desirable and undesirable outcomes of an intervention. Okay, direct and indirect. So we are seeing a lot of understandings, a lot of differences. We have, like, we can see the causality in there. We can see that we want to have it on a rather high level. Period of time, the sustainability always plays or seems to play a role. So, and this is basically what we have done in the study as well, asking other people for their impact definition, but on a much more scientific and much more sophisticated way. And maybe we can start browsing into this with Tereza taking over.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Sebastian, for the introduction, and hello to everyone. So it's great. You have all shared your impact narratives, or how you understand impact. And as Sebastian said, we have tried to systematize and synthesize what those impact narratives in the sector are. And today we will present you the findings of the study. But before we get to that, I will maybe just do a quick breeze through about why actually are we looking into impact narratives and trying to understand what is impact. So recent years have seen that it's okay, I think or you mean for the that's good. Clicking the presentation. So so recent years have seen increase in questioning and reflection about the capabilities, effectiveness, and impact in development cooperation and humanitarian action. Agencies increasingly demand that impact is evidenced or proven by studying and establishing basically if and to what extent an intervention has contributed to a change, so-called causal effect. And for this reason, actors have been also setting and reviewing their outcome and impact terminology in an effort to meet the scientific standards that would essentially enable them, first of all, ensure their credibility of their justifications, and secondly, provide stronger evidence for their decisions. Now, in Welthungerhilfe, click here.
With the arrows, it worked.
Yeah, great. Now, in Welthungerhilfe, we have been also trying to respond to this motion. In 2003, we published a concept paper with intention to monitor impact and outcomes. And since then, we have also published different guidances and initiatives to strengthen our impact and outcome orientation. And this provided kind of basic hints on what impact evaluation involves, but we find that they need to be further built on, especially in the given the evolution of the scientific standards in the recent years. Now, at the same time, recent discourses and modalities in development cooperation and humanitarian action have challenged established definitions of impact. And therefore, we argue as Welthungerhilfe that a non-systemic understanding of impact is no longer appropriate. Firstly, given the increased emphasis on resilience and sustainability of systems in addressing underlying causes of global challenges, we ask ourselves, how do we capture resilience and sustainability of systems? Secondly, the localization discourse demands that we recognize local capacities when taking credit for so-called impact and also when designing the assessment. Then decolonization emphasizes the need to go beyond measurement frameworks built on financial power of donor agencies. Gender and human rights mainstreaming stipulates recognition of transformative effects related to sociocultural, economic, and political dynamics within systems. And given increased complexity in programming, we ask ourselves, how can we really capture and learn from the contribution of other factors and other actors that our interventions interact with? And to this end, we conducted multi-layered original research to review the appropriateness of current impact definitions. As part of this study, we essentially reviewed academic literature to draw 6 attributes that characterize impact. We then used these attributes to analyze 41 definitions of impact definitions of different actors, specifically international institutions, donor agencies, NGOs, and think tanks, in order to synthesize these findings to inform the refinement of practitioners' definitions of impact. And what we found, so what are the 6 attributes that that we drew and used to analyze the impact definitions? So firstly, causality, or is there a causal link between the intervention and the change? Secondly, subject of change, or where are we looking for change? Then third is intentionality, or do we consider also unintended or unanticipated changes? Then directness, or how far from the intervention do we expect to see the change? Dimensions of change, or domains where impact may be measured. These consist essentially from reach, meaning how many, for example, people are reached. Magnitude, or how strong is the effect size, the change. Duration, how long lasts the change. And equity, or how equal is the change across groups. And finally, beneficiality, or was the change beneficial for the affected groups? Now, having applied these 6 attributes to the 41 impact definitions, we essentially found that causality is the core attribute of impact. We saw consistent reference of causality across all the definitions of impact, while the application of the other 5 attributes exhibited great variability. Now, we also found that causality is essentially used by several organizations to distinguish between impact and outcome, while others distinguish between the 2 concepts by emphasizing the level at which the change takes place. Okay, so now emphasizing the level of change implies that essentially impact follows outcomes, whereby impact is reached when the highest level change has occurred. Yeah. Now, what this means is that emphasizing this level of change involves viewing outcomes as effects of outputs and impact as an effect of outcomes, which implies a requirement to establish causality at every level of the chain. Yeah. Now, this we find is a condition that is quite difficult to satisfy in practice. Now, the second approach focuses on differentiating between outcomes and impact by emphasizing causality. This means that the actors who use this approach, they only include reference to causal effects in their impact definition and not in the definition of outcome. Now, this approach essentially views outcomes as observable changes in status. So it's changes that we can observe, while impact, so these change, and then these changes qualify as impact only when causality is established with evidence. Yeah. Now, what this means is that outcome would essentially demand measuring variables of interests that are plausibly linked to interventions, but that do not require that this link between the intervention and so this causal link between the intervention and the change is established with evidence. On the other hand, impact then requires that we use right fit evidence to establish this causal link or to somehow minimize uncertainty of the intervention's contribution to the change. And here are a couple of organizations who use these two approaches. So the emphasis of level of change is used, for example, by ICRC, OECD, Action Against Hunger, and so on and so on. And the emphasis of causality is used, for example, by USAID, WFP, World Bank, and 3IE. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Arno.
Thank you, Tereza. And I would suggest let's just let that sink in for a second. So these key findings, really, the one attribute that all impact definitions have in common is causality. But the way in which causality is being thought of is wildly different. So organizations distinguish between outcomes and impacts really in two ways, either by defining impact as the higher level chain, the change that sits, so to say, at the end of the causal chain, as Tereza has said, or by defining impact as a causal effect on outcomes. And so if we go to the next slide, we can dive a little bit more into detail there. As Tereza has said, plausibility is the key for the second model. So the idea of causal effect on outcomes being what makes impact, not outcomes. So we're leaning a little bit on Bayesian thinking here to some extent. So saying that based on priors, you'd assume that there will be a link, and via outcome evaluation and monitoring, that link will be traced, but only when it's evidenced by a more rigorous measure of impact, we can actually label it as impact. How does that look like in practice? You can see it conceptualized here. Outputs emerge near deterministically from the intervention. That is the solid link that you can see right at the bottom. Then the causal links of intermediate and high level outcomes, and also their feedback loops with systemic outcomes, which I'll get to in a second, are interpreted. And the links to the intervention are assumed. But then conversely, following this epistemological perspective, one would speak of impact when a causal link is actually established by evidence, not just assumed and interpreted. And so if you can just click once, with this change in perspective that some actors show, but that is definitely not something we see across the board. When impact is understood as a causal effect, that thinking also opens up the opportunity to consider not just effects on behavior and well-being outcomes, well-being also understood in terms of well-being of people, but also the planet. But it actually affects affects the opportunity to actually look at impact on systems as such. In other words, impact could include impact on system patterns, such as networks, such as repetitive interactions and flows in the system, changes in system dynamics. It could look at system structures, such as policies, frameworks. It could look at system paradigms, system goals, as an example, underlying narratives as well, accepted truths. And so next slide. We actually investigated a little bit more the definitions to get a better understanding of how causality in terms of impact on behavior, well-being, and systems is supposed to be established based on these different definitions. We take that from the impact definitions themselves, and we're available from the underlying guidance notes that oftentimes accompany those. And there, broadly speaking, we can distinguish between two, what I lovingly call the causality camps that I assume are familiar to many of you. That is the attribution camp and the contribution camp. So attribution is understood as the extent to which a change can be seen as the result of an intervention. So we take an intervention perspective here first and foremost and ask, what is the change that the intervention has affected? For instance, drinking water made safe by chlorine solution reduces child mortality. The intervention is in the center, and then we look at the effect that can be attributed to the intervention. Vice versa, contribution would be understood as the extent to which it can be claimed that the intervention was part of a set of causes that together were sufficient to lead to a change. So we take a systems perspective here at first and ask, was the intervention one of the causes of change that in their interrelation affected the change? A good example here would be a norm-shifting intervention contributes to girls changing roles to remain in school and to marry and have children later in life, just to kind of give a clear example there. So next slide. We then analyzed this across the impact definitions, and we found that organizations in the field are deeply divided in their contrasting viewpoints on causality as attribution or contribution. What is interesting is that international institutions tend to perceive causality as encompassing both attribution and contribution. Development cooperation agencies tend to lean a bit more towards viewing causality as either attribution alone or both attribution and contribution. And then NGOs on the other side of the spectrum demonstrate a tendency toward interpreting causality as contribution. And their understanding of causality also tends to be a little bit more diverse compared to other actors. Overall, the most widely used perspective on causality that is adopted by 15 of the 41 organizations recognizes that causal links may involve both attribution and contribution, and that perspective is largely influenced by a change in perspectives from OECD. As Tereza has mentioned before, OECD introduced the first OECD DAC definition of impact in 2002, and then updated that in 2019. And the explanatory notes in the definition in 2019 actually specify that the definition of impact now encompasses both perspectives on causality. And we see that 9 out of 15 actors who see causality as encompassing both actually have adopted the impact definition from OECD. So that's a straightforward copy-pasting, and that includes 6 out of 7 development cooperation agencies in that category. What is also interesting is that the out-of-date OECD DAC definition from 2002 is still largely used by many actors right now. And that is, in a sense, problematic in that the previous OECD DAC definition was criticized as very vague. We can see that here, OECD DAC 2002 referred to impact as effects produced by a development intervention, and was not able to actually clarify how impact is different from outcomes to begin with. And this is the case for actually 3 out of 5 development cooperation agencies with a vague perspective on causality right now. Moving on. Attribution-minded actors tend to take a little bit more of an intervention perspective, as I have said before, on impact. So the subject of change would then logically also tend to be more individual and household-centric. And the change would either not be conceptualized or the type of change would be conceptualized as long-term effects. Other types of dimensions would typically not occur. Vice versa, we found that contribution-minded actors tend to take a more systemic perspective on impact. By that, I mean that the subject of change can include subjects beyond the individual and the household. So we'd see references in definitions such as communities, institutions, or systems. We see that change is oftentimes more comprehensively covered with different types, different varieties of change included. Some definitions even including equity of change in impact definitions. And then interestingly, the wording direct or indirect, which does appear in most attribution-minded definitions, actually doesn't occur in more contribution-minded definitions. And we derive from this that the directness of impact, at least that would be our claim so far based on the data we have, simply doesn't seem to be a matter of concern to more contribution, more systemically minded actors. So the distance, in short, between the intervention and the change itself does not become part of the impact definition anymore. These findings, I have to stress, are in line with the only other analysis that has been done on outcome and impact definition so far by Belgian Palmberg in 2018. So I do have to stress some limits to this analysis. Number one, the extent to which a definition implies a systemic understanding is one thing. But then number two, the extent to which the understanding that's implied in the definition actually shines through practice can be a completely different thing. Initially, we tried to get a better understanding, particularly because we sometimes saw that the OECD definition of outcomes or impact would be taken over, but then sometimes another one would be interpreted. Definitions are not always clear. We can sometimes see actually organizations not really separating outcome and impact thinking. And then when we tried to understand practice a little bit more, we did dig into quite a couple of evaluations and also found that many actually don't have impact evaluations of any sort. We coined the exploratory term the Humpty Dumpty definition of impact. Those of you familiar with Alice in Wonderland might know that there was this one creature, Humpty Dumpty, saying words mean whatever I want them to mean. And we see that there might be a little bit of that at play, but it's too early for us with this preliminary analysis to see how far that applies and also how true to the words and underlying mindsets evaluations actually are. Just as a word of caution, it's not a black and white type of thing. Well, what do we take away from this? Our initial research shows that the way in which impact is defined has direct implications for how evidence can contribute to system transformation. But I would just kind of invite you to take a look at funding flows as an example, see what funding is available for impact measurement of any sort, what funding is available for impact evaluation, and what part of that funding is available for systemic impact evaluation. So following that train of thought, when impact is understood as a causal effect of interventions on impact in systems, meaning that we also then want to emphasize what does causality mean, how can we trace a proper causal effect, this creates an expectation to engage in proper impact measurement. And this is accompanied with an understanding that is open to systems, that also opens the door for conversations around how do we measure impact on systems, which we have shown can actually be quite divergent from common impact narratives. A good practice to help foster this could be to expand the subject of change in impact definitions on broader systems, also in institutions. Another good practice could be to include contribution language, and we would argue preferably actually both attribution and contribution language. Second, systemic impact measurement itself actually helps to identify what works to impact systems. And so hopefully with a great emphasis on systemic impact measurement, we can tackle perspective change, engage in relevance questions as well, engage in equity questions more. So these types of questions, longevity as well, that tend to not be addressed as much by evaluations focusing on impact as of now, which helps to be more amenable to discourses of human rights, decriminalization, localization, and relevance. And third, if we follow that more visionary path and we imagine we see a change in impact narratives toward a more systemic understanding, we do see a take-up in more systemic impact evaluation as well, then we would see that system transformation practice itself can both benefit from evidence about what works to impact systems, but also provide greater evidence to achieve greater impact together. And that can give us a nudge to consider more consciously how we will engage with system actors across the board, across the world to sustain and to scale positive. So that's it in terms of the initial findings we have. I'll hand it over to Sebastian.
Yeah, great. Maybe thanks a lot for listening to us. Thanks a lot for elaborating that nicely. And also maybe we can focus on the discussion also on the last slide and get from you now a little bit the notion how this vision of more systemic impact evaluations for more impact as such, more transformative impact sounds to you and how it resonates with you. Do you think it's a pathway worth traveling, or just bounce your ideas with us on how you see the differentiation between outcomes and impact is done? Does it resonate? But don't feel limited to those questions, right? Should really be an open discussion, and we like to only give a little nudge. Thank you. Do you have?